Breaking the pattern. For most of human history, power triumphed over principle. Conquest was celebrated, slavery assumed, domination expected. If there's a constant in the human story, it is not justice but the ruthless logic of tribe and might. And yet, somewhere along the line, something changed. Societies began to restrain themselves. They outlawed slavery while it was still very profitable. They codified rights even for those without power. They declared that rulers, too, must be bound by rules. Principle clawed back space from power. This is what I call the moral break, not moral perfection, not the abolition of violence or hypocrisy, but the fragile, unprecedented, and uneven rise toward restraint. It emerged not from biology or inevitability, but from a unique fusion of cultural traditions: Greek reason, Judeo-Christian ethics, and Enlightenment liberalism. Together, they created the fragile operating system of modern progress. And today, that inheritance is under siege, and risks unraveling. The tribal default. To see the anomaly, we first have to remember the default. Evolution did not equip us to be universalists. It equipped us to be tribal. We care for our kin, our clan, our people. Robert Trivers showed how even altruism is strategic. We help when it pays us back. Hypocrisy, too, is adaptive. Self-deception helps us deceive others more effectively. These are not bugs of human morality. They are features of survival. Psychologist Paul Bloom adds another layer. Empathy, far from being a reliable moral compass, is biased and parochial. We empathize with those who look like us, sound like us, suffer in front of us. Empathy rallies mobs, fuels tribal vengeance, and privileges the tear-jerking victim over the faceless many. It doesn't scale. What does scale is reason, the capacity to step outside our tribe and see principles that hold regardless of who benefits. But reason is weak in the wild. Left to itself, it is bent to justify what our tribe already wants. That's why history, left to its default, is a graveyard of conquest and slavery. Greek reason. The Greeks gave us something special, the idea that truth could be pursued through reason, independent of tribe, myth, or power. From the axioms of geometry to the arguments of Socrates, they built tools of abstraction that force consistency. If a principle is true, it must be true everywhere. The Stoics pushed this further, suggesting that all humans share in a rational order of nature. It was the first crack in the wall of tribal morality. But reason on its own can float above reality. That's where the Romans come in. Rome's genius was not philosophy but implementation. They built a vast machinery of law, codified statutes, contracts, property rights, and rules that bound not just subjects but, at times, the state itself. Roman law was imperfect, exclusionary, hierarchical, but it planted the seed that rules could restrain rulers. Greek reason provided the intellectual scaffolding. Roman law gave it teeth. Together, they set the precedent for universality as something more than an ideal. Judeo-Christian ethics. If Greek reason offered the logic of universals, Judeo-Christian ethics gave them a moral heartbeat. The Hebrew prophets shattered the assumption that gods only cared about power and sacrifice. They spoke of justice, mercy, and the worth of the weak. The radical claim that humans were made in the image of God introduced the idea, however inconsistently applied, that every person carried intrinsic dignity. Christianity universalized this even further. Its message inverted worldly hierarchies. The meek would inherit, the last would be first, blessed are the poor. These weren't political programs so much as moral provocations, seeds that abolitionists and reformers would harvest centuries later. For all its complicity in conquest and slavery, the New Testament's ethic of conscience and compassion provided an arsenal for dissenters. Where Greek thought offered rational consistency, Judeo-Christian faith offered moral equality. Together they began to build something new, the unsettling idea that power must answer not only to logic, but to conscience. Enlightenment liberalism. The Enlightenment took the scaffolding of Greek reason and the moral charge of Judeo-Christian ethics and did something audacious. It put them into law, institutions, and political philosophy. Locke argued that natural rights flowed from our shared human faculties. Montesquieu insisted on separating powers so no ruler could dominate unchecked. Kant grounded morality in universality. If a principle cannot be willed as a law for all, it collapses into contradiction. For the first time, moral claims weren't left to revelation or custom alone. They were codified as rights, constitutions, and checks on authority. Jefferson's declaration that all men are created equal was not empirically true in his own time, but as a rational principle it carried explosive force. Once inscribed in law and culture, such universals could be wielded against the very institutions that betrayed them. The Enlightenment was not purity but power constrained. It institutionalized dissent, legalized self-critique, and made restraint enforceable. This was the leap from moral vision to political architecture. The fusion. None of these strands alone would have been enough. Greek reason without compassion could justify hierarchy. Judeo-Christian morality without reason could sink into zealotry. Enlightenment liberalism without deeper roots could collapse into cold utilitarianism. But in their convergence, they created something new, a cultural mutation that allowed power, for the first time in history, to be systematically restrained by principle. This fragile synthesis is what I call the moral break. Gestures beyond the West. The West did not have a monopoly on moral progress. Across civilizations, prophets and rulers gestured toward universals that reached beyond tribe. Buddhism preached compassion for all beings. Ashoka carved edicts of tolerance into stone. Confucian thought urged rulers to govern with benevolence. These were genuine breakthroughs, but they rarely scaled into durable institutions. Ashoka's reforms faded after his death, and Confucian benevolence remained bound to hierarchy. What made the West distinctive was not the first expression of universals, but their fusion and institutionalization woven into laws, rights, and checks on power. Other cultures glimpsed the horizon. The West built a road toward it. Harari's challenge: are rights just stories? Yuval Noah Harari, in *Sapiens*, makes a powerful claim. Human rights are no different from gods or money. They are shared fictions that exist only because we collectively believe in them. And he has a point. Humans do live in symbolic worlds. Nations, currencies, constitutions, corporations. None are out there in nature, yet they shape history more than mountains or rivers. Without such imagined orders, large-scale cooperation would be impossible. But here is the problem: not all stories are equal. Zeus vanishes the moment belief fades. But the truth that murder is wrong reveals itself to us the moment we imagine being the victim. Reason then extends the insight: if it is wrong for me to be killed, it is wrong for anyone. The same holds for slavery. To picture ourselves chained or owned is to grasp its cruelty. These are not mere fictions. They are evolved sentiments clarified by impartial reason into universal claims that hold whether or not a culture chooses to honor them. Harari is right that humans need stories to coordinate, but wrong to flatten them into one category. Some stories collapse when belief fades. Others are reason-forged universals expressed through stories. Of course, reason alone doesn't compel behavior. Humans bend logic to tribe as easily as to truth. What matters is when these universals gain cultural and institutional traction, when they are codified in law, enforced by conscience, and made costly to ignore. That is when they become more than stories. Psychologist Paul Bloom makes the distinction clear. Empathy, he argues, is tribal and biased. Rational compassion, by contrast, uses reason to extend moral concern universally. Abolition illustrates the point. As Seymour Drescher showed, slavery was still very profitable when Britain outlawed it. Ending it required the Royal Navy to suppress the trade at enormous cost. That wasn't myth or utility. It was principle restraining profit. If rights are only fictions, they can be swapped for any tale, including illiberal ones. If rights are reasoned universals, they are fragile but binding. That is the difference between Harari's story of adaptability and what I call the moral break. Fragility and threats today. Harari sees humanity's genius in our adaptability, our endless ability to invent new imagined orders to hold societies together. He is right about the power of narrative. But history delivers a sobering verdict. Most stories did not widen the circle of concern. They sanctified tribe, bloodline, caste, and divine kingship, channeling human cooperation into exclusion and violence. The truly rare and precious story is the one that restrains power rather than blessing it, the story that dares to put limits on the strong. That is why the moral break is fragile. It wasn't inevitable, and it may not be permanent. The liberal synthesis of reason, conscience, and rights is under assault today from both left and right. On the activist left, critical social justice theory recasts universalism as oppression, reducing history to tribal guilt and individuals to group identities, where equality yields to permanent hierarchies of innocence and blame. On the populist right, a parallel tribal politics divides the country into patriots and enemies of the people, exalting power over principle, control over compromise, and grievance as a governing creed. Both abandon the fragile inheritance of liberal universalism, one in the name of equity, the other in the name of nationalist order, collapsing politics back into the age-old struggle of us versus them. Closing vision. For most of history, power had no leash. Conquest was honored, slavery assumed, domination expected. The moral break, the fragile fusion of reason, conscience, and universal rights, was the rare anomaly when societies began to restrain themselves. It did not end evil or erase hypocrisy, but it created a new operating system. Rulers could be bound by rules, and principles could be turned against the powerful. That achievement is not self-sustaining. We flatter ourselves that progress is natural, that history bends toward justice. History bends toward power. Justice must be argued for, institutionalized, and defended again and again. When universals collapse back into tribal myths, we return to the human default, domination without restraint. The danger today is not merely that progress stalls but that it unravels. The liberal inheritance of rights, equality, and law is fragile, and once lost, it may not return for a long time, if it returns at all. The moral break was never destiny. It was a cultural mutation, an extraordinary decision to restrain ourselves. That decision is the only reason we can speak of progress at all. The question for our time is stark. Will we defend it, or let it dissolve back into the tribal darkness from which it came?